use tax barriers to overcome, one, the biggest issue is that most small and medium-sized businesses, they have no clue what this use tax is. It's been around since the 30s, but they're not even aware of it. So this is, in most small to mid-sized business, this is a brand new tax, something they're going to have to do with, something they're going to have to do that they never had to deal with in their business previously. I mentioned earlier that it's difficult to apply the use tax law because it's complicated and confusing, and there's all kinds of different carve-outs, exceptions, exclusions, and so forth. The other issue, this use tax education program, that is the program that the department has launched to help educate these 300,000 small businesses about their filing responsibility. And the other thing here is that the department has shared with us is that 96% of their audits, they'll find something. And in fact, in part of our practice, what we typically like to do is go into a business and see where you've overpaid your taxes and help you get that money back. And we know that if we look hard enough, 96% of the time we're going to find something that you've overpaid. Well, the exact same thing is true on the other side of that. If the department were to come in and look to see where you've underpaid, 96% of the time they're going to find something. So, again, if you're on that list, you're going to be forced to deal with this, and if you let the department into your doors, they're going to find something. So, when we talk to our clients and other taxpayers that are going to be forced to deal with this, we really say there's two ways that you can handle this particular initiative in this use tax. The first option that we talk about is if you do nothing, and I'll just say out of the gate that's not really our recommendation, but we understand that certain business owners and businesses, they may not have a whole lot of exposure, and they're willing to take that risk and do nothing, and if the department contacts them, well, they'll deal with it on the back end. But there's some very important things we do recommend that if you choose to do nothing, that you at least do something. So we want to talk about what could happen if you do nothing. Okay, the way it will likely work is that these letters will be rolled out, and we're going to talk about an amnesty program here in the next few slides. That is it's a pretty long window that's going to give taxpayers an opportunity to come forward, pay prior year taxes, get things cleaned up, and move forward. But for folks that ignore that opportunity, what will likely happen is that the Department of Taxation will send assessments, okay? And these assessments are literally, they are estimated assessment. The department has no clue what sort of liability you might have in your business without looking at your records. So what they will typically do is they will estimate an assessment, and it's a pure estimate. And typically what happens is that estimate is a large figure to get your attention. So what will happen is you'll get an assessment, and if you do nothing, you'll get a second letter, a second assessment, and then what ultimately happens is I've had clients ask me, well, how is the department going to deal with 300,000 businesses? They don't have the manpower. Well, that's exactly correct. They don't. But here's what happens, is that the Department of Taxation is not the agency that actually collects on outstanding tax debts. They turn that over to the Ohio Attorney General's office. Okay? In the Ohio Attorney General's office, obviously, they don't have the manpower to track down 300,000 small businesses. So what does the Attorney General's office do? They outsource that function to other outside third-party agencies, collection agencies, that will collect on the state of Ohio's behalf. So if you do nothing, you're going to get an assessment. Chances are you're going to be dealing with an outside collection agency that really doesn't understand taxes. They're good at collecting outstanding debt, and they know what the number is that's been estimated, and that's what they have to collect. They're not familiar with sales and use tax laws. So, if you do nothing, you're going to have to go back for a much longer period of time, but you have to really keep detailed records. So again, if you choose to do nothing, our recommendation is you really have to have good records. You're going to have to go back to, at a minimum, 2008. And the type of items you need to have in your records is you actually have to have invoices. Invoices are probably one of the most important items because the invoices are proof that sales tax was charged and that you paid it. You also have to have copies of your receipts, canceled checks, and so forth. So again, key is you have to have really good records, okay? And then the other thing to keep in mind is that if you do not participate in this amnesty program, which we're going to talk about here in a second, is that you're going to be subject to penalties and you're going to be subject to interest. And the other thing is that Sales and use tax and a couple other taxes are one of the unique taxes where shareholders, owners of businesses, even key employees can have personal liability. So that if for some reason you're assessed a big number, and let's just say that you have a corporation or a limited liability company, that's the shareholders, the owners, and even key employees in those businesses can still have liability for those taxes. So again, our recommendation is not to do nothing, but at least take a look at these items and make sure that you have all your ducks in a row, so to speak, so that in the event you do get contacted, you know how to deal with it. So again, in summary, you've got to look at all your purchases. As you're signing your checks on a weekly, monthly basis, look at your invoices, see whether there's actually tax on those. You'll be able to easily identify the vendors that aren't charging you tax that should be. Look at what you think your exposure is, and then you really need to start putting some procedures in place to track this stuff on a go-forward basis, because with today's technology in our mind, it's not a matter of if you're identified, it's a matter of when. So it's best to start preparing for it now. So those are our recommendations, I guess, if you do nothing. It's not really do nothing, but at least prepare yourself. And really what our recommendation is to take a proactive approach. And with this recently signed budget bill, there are some very taxpayer-friendly terms to get prior years cleaned up. And I'll say this, I've been practicing in this area for 15 years, so I've seen the different programs the state of Ohio has offered, whether it be a voluntary disclosure, they've had prior year amnesty programs. And I'll just tell you, this particular amnesty is far better than any other amnesty ever offered in the past. So from a practitioner standpoint, I feel this is business friendly. But the clients that I talk with, they have a different take, and maybe the folks on the line, you may feel the same way, that this may not be business friendly, because what has to happen is you have to go back and look at prior years. But here are the benefits of participating in this amnesty. One, the program, it starts October 1, and it has a very long window, and that window in and of itself is very different than any other amnesty program offered in the past, and I believe that the reason that they've created such a long window for taxpayers to become compliant is because this is a big deal. They understand that there's 300,000 businesses that have never had to deal with this tax, and in most cases it's a brand new tax. So they've given taxpayers a good window of opportunity to take advantage of this amnesty program. The other benefits here are that they limit the look-back period. When this use tax education program was first rolled out, they were going to force taxpayers to go back 4 years, and they would abate the penalty and part of the interest. But as part of this new amnesty, what they're allowing folks to do is go back to January 1, 2009 only, which is a much more limited window. If taxpayers participate in the amnesty, they'll abate 100% of the penalties. They'll abate 100% of the interest, which has not happened to my knowledge in the past. They'll typically give a break on the interest, maybe 50%, but never abate 100% of it. And the other thing that's really unique to this particular program is that in the event that you have a large liability, they will allow you to work out a payment plan with no penalties or interest, which is, again, in my mind, based on my experience of what I've seen, this is much more taxpayer friendly than the programs of the past. Now, there's some unique things about this amnesty. In fact, taxpayers are really put into what I'll call two different categories: taxpayers that were previously registered and taxpayers that were not registered. And there's some differences in how those folks are treated. So folks that were actually registered for the use tax, okay, you do have the ability, to participate in this amnesty program, but you're going to be treated a little differently. So you do have the ability to limit your look-back period, so no tax penalty or interest will be assessed before 2009. However, if you do participate and you had a use tax account previously, you're going to be responsible for interest and penalty on your unpaid use tax. But they also, there's no criminal prosecution for those that participate. So intuitively, does that make a lot of sense? Because I've had folks say this to me, that I've made a good faith effort to register and pay the tax previously. I was registered, yet if I participate, you're not going to abate the penalties and interest. Well, That's a great question. But the reality is, folks that had a use tax account, it's not quite as favorable as those that have not. So again, one of the key differences is here is that you can limit the look back period, but you're going to be on the hook for penalty and interest. Now, the next slide here, it talks about if you were not previously registered. And again, the distinction here, the key difference is that they limit the look back period, no tax, penalty, or interest from 2009 or prior, but the penalty and the interest is fully abated, and there's no criminal prosecution. Personal liability goes away, and then again, you do have the ability to make payments. And what we've been told is that consumers, that taxpayers that do not participate in this amnesty, that's when the audits will start. And we know that the department has the list. They know we've identified 300, or the department has identified 300,000 businesses that should have accounts. If you do not participate and they think you should have an account, well, that's when the audits will ensue. And one important point I want to make here is that even if you do not have a liability every quarter or semi-annually, from the department's perspective, is that they expect you to file a return. So oftentimes I talk to taxpayers and they say, "Oh, I pay tax on everything." Well, that may be the case, but you're still expected to file a return. So again, this amnesty, it's in our view, it is very taxpayer friendly. It gives an opportunity for folks to come forward, get prior years cleaned up, and if you do not, and you're on that list, it's going to be a different process that you have to go through, and it's not going to be much fun. We also, the primary focus of the presentation was use tax, but just a couple other items that I wanted to mention as part of the budget bill that are applicable, because oftentimes when we're talking with folks about this use tax, they may have some other liabilities, sales tax, for example, that are out there. They do have a general tax amnesty, and this one would be similar to others of the past, where the window of that opportunity, it's much shorter. You can see it runs from May 1 to June 15, approximately 45 days. But any other taxes that you may be delinquent on, they give you the ability to come forward and get those cleaned up, and they'll abate the penalty and only 1/2 of the interest. Again, that's a distinction between the use tax amnesty and why this use tax amnesty is, it's got a longer window. They're making it more favorable, again, because in our view, it's because it's a brand new tax and folks haven't had to deal with it. So, in short, our recommendations is that you really need to go through a process and look at all of your in and out-of-state transactions. You need to figure out which transactions you're not paying tax on, and then you have to go through a process and say, okay, if I didn't pay tax on these, should I have paid tax? And really come up with what your exposure is. And our recommendation is to work with a use tax expert, someone that knows sales and use tax law inside and out, because again, it's a very, very specialized area of tax. If you don't deal with it day in and day out, it could cost you money if you're not working with the right folks. So take advantage of this opportunity. Limit the look back period to 2009. Take the opportunity to get rid of all the interest, the penalties, and if you have a big liability, take advantage of these interest-free payment plans. And then the other thing we talk about, I mentioned earlier in the presentation, one of the things we'd love to do is to go into businesses and determine if you've overpaid tax. And you're going to be forced to look at your record, so take this opportunity to look at all of your purchases and see if maybe you are overpaying. Well, and if you are, this is a good reason to file refund claims. Turn over the use tax that you owe, but maybe there's some refunds out there available. They'll offset each other. Maybe you'll actually be in an overall refund position. So take that opportunity to look at everything. Try to minimize the use tax and hopefully come up with some refunds. So that was our presentation. Again, I've got my contact information is right here on the screen. So if you're not comfortable asking a question during the presentation, feel free to call me in the office or on my cell phone. Shoot me an email with your question, And I'll be happy to get back with you and answer any questions you have about the use tax, the process, and so forth. Also, please check out our website, ohiousetax.com. There's a lot of good information out there. We're continually updating that as we talk to the department. Any new press releases and so forth that's out there, our presentation will be out there at some point later this week. So if you wanted to go back and refer to the presentation, it should be there for your use. I want to thank everyone for participating, and again, feel free to reach out to us if you have questions.